My name is Katie Balok, and our project is about carbon footprint and its impact on international transportation and logistics.
And I'm Zoe Cacheria, and we will be discussing the similarities and the differences between the two largest carbon emitters in the world, the US and China.
Here's a short introductory video to get you thinking about the impact of carbon footprint on the supply chain as a whole.
The Simple Show explains the carbon footprint. This is you. You've probably been hearing a lot about climate change and how you should reduce your carbon footprint. But what is that exactly? Just like an actual footprint, it's a mark you leave upon the environment. No, not with your shoes, but with every action that releases carbons. Those are the harmful gases, such as CO2, which are pumped out by burning fossil fuels like oil or gas. The more fuel you use, the bigger your footprint will be. You may think that by driving your car, the only carbons you release come from the engine, but no. Consider the carbons that are emitted just to get fuel into the tank. From the energy needed to extract the oil from underground, the pollution caused by transportation and refinement, to the final delivery to your local petrol station. Not to mention the CO2 released by manufacturing your car in the first place. More than you thought, huh? So unless you live in a cave, you and everything you own has its own carbon footprint. Read a book? Printing and distributing. It uses energy. Brush your teeth, and your utensils will have a history in a factory. Even something as basic as an apple could have traveled hundreds or even thousands of polluting miles to end up in your local supermarket. You see, it's pretty much impossible to leave no carbon footprint behind, but that's no reason to stop trying. Think about your actions and choices, and you'll be able to reduce your personal mark after all. That's how you really put the boot into climate change.
As shown from this graph, freight carbon emissions are split up by each respective mode. It's no surprise that the most widely used mode of transportation, trucking, has the highest level of carbon emissions at 68%, followed by marine and rail, totaling 22% of all freight transportation-related carbon footprint.
As discussed in class, there are many characteristics to consider when selecting a mode of transportation. One dimension not discussed that could impact mode selection through future regulations is the carbon footprint of each mode.
Because trucking accounts for 68% of all freight carbon emissions, does this mean that companies will move away from motor carrier transport? No. Trucking will still continue to be the most flexible mode of transportation. It will be up to the industry to come up with more sustainable motor carriers that don't emit as much carbon into the atmosphere.
Of all logistics activities, manufacturing emits the most greenhouse gases at 20% of total emissions by sector, surpassing transportation by roughly 3%.
It is clear from this graphic that China has the largest carbon footprint, with the US trailing closely behind. There can be a connection drawn between the immense manufacturing activities outsourced to China and their large carbon footprint. Earlier, we stated that manufacturing is the logistics activity with the largest carbon footprint. The President of China made a landmark commitment in late 2015 to start a national program in 2017 that will limit and put a price on greenhouse gas emissions. The move to create a so-called cap-and-trade system would be a substantial step by the world's largest polluter to reduce its emissions from major industries, including steel, cement, paper, and electric power.
On June 25, 2013, President Obama announced a series of executive actions to reduce the carbon pollution, prepare the U.S. for impacts of climate change, and lead international efforts to address global climate change. As part of the Climate Action Plan, President Obama issued a presidential memo directing the EPA to work to complete carbon pollution standards for the power sector.
The Environment Protection Agency is implementing regulations to ensure that transportation fuel sold in the United States contains a minimum volume of renewable fuel. By 2022, a renewable fuel standards program will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 138 million metric tons, about the annual emissions of 27 million passenger vehicles, replacing about 7% of expected annual diesel consumption and decreasing oil imports by 41.5 billion.
As 2016 will be the year where we solidify the second phase of greenhouse gas regulations for commercial trucks. And the proposed rulemaking came last summer. Comment period has been this fall, and now the agencies will figure out what that will be. And that will be important because that will set in place a stringency of new truck and trailer production. Phase two, I think what we're seeing is then that expectation of increasing fuel economy over, steps in the regulation between now and 2027 that in reality will make a difference. The greenhouse gas regulations are going to happen.
Okay.
And we need to figure that out together. It will have benefits in fuel savings and total cost of ownership savings if we do it right.
Okay.
And so I think attention to that's important going into 2016.
In time, carbon footprint will become an important factor in supply chain and logistics. Lots of companies are working to decrease their carbon footprint through new technological innovations like advanced motor carriers and increased communication with suppliers.